She rode into town with no name to give. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that danced across the dusty streets of Eldridge. A sense of stillness hung in the air, as if the town itself held its breath in anticipation of what was to come. The wooden buildings creaked softly, their paint peeling under the weight of years and stories untold. The stranger sat tall in the saddle, a dark silhouette against the orange horizon. Dust rose around her horse's hooves, swirling in tiny clouds, giving her an ethereal presence. No one could see her face clearly under the wide brim of her hat, but the tension thrumming through the air spoke volumes. She was not just another traveler passing through, she was a mystery wrapped in enigma, and the townsfolk could feel it. As she dismounted, the thud of her boots hitting the ground echoed in the silence. The townspeople began to gather, drawn to her like moths to a flame. Whispers floated across the square, tentative but curious. Who was she? Where had she come from? The questions punctuated the quiet, but she offered no answers. Instead, she simply surveyed her surroundings, her gaze lingering on the weathered faces of the locals. The sheriff, a stout man with a textured face lined by years of hard living, stepped forward. "Ma'am, state your business," he said, his voice gruff but edged with an unsteady curiosity. She turned to look at him, and for a brief moment the world around them disappeared. Her eyes, sharp and piercing, held a storm that seemed ready to break. "I'm looking for a place to rest," she finally replied, her voice smooth like silk yet carrying a weight that demanded respect. The sheriff nodded slowly, still trying to gauge her. There was something about her presence, something that challenged him, as if she didn't care about the rules of Eldridge or any authority it believed it wielded. As she walked toward the saloon, heads turned. The locals watched closely, their eyes narrowing in suspicion and fascination alike. She pushed open the creaky door, stepping inside as the light dimmed. The atmosphere was heavy with the smell of whiskey and sweat. Men sat hunched over tables, playing cards, their laughter rough and coarse. For a moment the room fell silent, and she felt every pair of eyes on her. In that brief silence, she took a moment. She felt the weight of their stares, assessing, judging. It was a familiar feeling. Moments like these can be electric, charged with unspoken stories and hidden fears. She approached the bar, her stride steady, her hands resting at her sides. "Whatever you have," she said to the bartender, a wiry man with thinning hair and a nervous smile. He poured her a drink, the whiskey glinting amber in the low light. She took a sip and savored the warmth that flowed through her. Fortified her a quiet reminder that she was alive, right here, right now. The gruff laughter resumed, but it felt different now, with her presence hanging like a cloud over the room. The men exchanged glances, some defiant, others intrigued. She lifted her glass slightly, a toast to the harsh reality of life they all shared. Just then a man burst through the door, his face flushed with urgency. His hands trembled as he scanned the room, finally locking eyes with her. You're the one," he shouted. The room fell silent again, the tension thick and palpable. She asked, an eyebrow raised, her tone challenging. "They say you're looking for something," he stammered, stepping closer, fear and hope battling behind his eyes. "Something." The saloon was rigid with anticipation. The bartender's hands paused in midair, the whiskey forgotten, and even the cards lay still on their tables. She pressed, her voice low and steady as she leaned in. "Word whispers in the wind," he rushed, his breath quickening. "About a girl who went missing. They say you traveled a long way to find her." Her expression shifted, a flicker of vulnerability shadowing her fierce demeanor. The truth, the pain of searching for a lost soul, lay bare for all to see, but she quickly masked it, reclaiming her courage. The man stepped closer, eyes bright with revelation. With that, he turned, his feet pounding against the wooden floor as he hurriedly exited the saloon. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, the impulse to follow him battling with the caution that had kept her alive all these years. But the need to know was greater. And so, she walked out into the fading light, the townsfolk watching intently as she slipped through the door. The stranger was a woman on a mission, her heart pounding like a drum, beckoning her to take the next step. Outside, the man waited, pacing like a caged animal entrapped by fear. "This way," he urged, beckoning her to follow. The sun dipped lower, painting the world in hues of purple and gold, but it hardly mattered. His urgency pulled her forward. They walked swiftly, weaving through narrow alleyways and across empty lots, the sound of their boots echoing against the walls. He led her to an abandoned house on the outskirts of Eldridge, its roof sagging and its windows dark. "She was last seen here," he whispered, glancing around nervously. Inside, the air was stale and thick, laden with ghosts and secrets. She stepped cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest as she explored the musty wooden floors. Dust motes danced in the slanting beams of light, creating an unsettling beauty. Everything felt silent, as if the house understood the weight of her mission and held its breath. She asked, looking deep into his anxious eyes. "They say she was taken," he replied, his voice trembling ever so slightly. His words hung heavily between them. The sorrow of unknowing gripped her, tightening its hold like a vice. In that moment she felt the burden of lost lives, the countless stories of missing people buried under the weight of silence. Fear and anger ignited within her, burning with intensity. She surveyed the house with resolute determination. There had been too much suffering, and she wouldn't allow it to continue. Do you know their names? No, he admitted, shaking his head. But there are whispers, tales told in shadows. They say there's a meeting, a gathering tonight in the hills. That's where they go to talk, where they come together. They're planning something. Then we'll go, she declared, her resolve heating like the very fire of her spirit. It was not just about the girl anymore. It was about everyone who had ever felt the awful grip of despair. Wait, he cautioned, panic weaving through his voice. You can't just confront them. I've faced worse, she shot back, her eyes igniting with purpose. With those words, she stepped outside, leaving him behind as she had done many times before. The path ahead blurred under the weight of hope, fear, and determination. She followed the fading light towards the distant hills, her heart beating steadily despite the rising tension in the air. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, shadows began to crawl over the land like dark fingers reaching for her. In that inky darkness, a flicker of light caught her eye. A fire burned in the distance, casting flickering silhouettes against the mountainside. She took a deep breath, feeling the heat of purpose swell within her. They were waiting. She crept forward, each step deliberate as the roar of laughter and voices grew louder. Peering through the brush, she saw them, men and women huddled around a fire, their faces obscured but their intentions clear. A plot was brewing there, one that held consequences far beyond the confines of this town. She watched, her breath caught in her throat as they spoke in low voices, urgency saturating the air. In that moment, she recognized the power of the unknown. These were not just people, they were manifestations of fear, of everything evil that had a grip on the world. She drew herself up, intensity burning behind her eyes. What were they planning? What tragedy were they weaving? She felt the pulse of her mission coursing through her veins, an unyielding thirst for justice igniting the fire within. Suddenly, a shout pierced the night air and chaos erupted. A scuffle broke out. The meeting had escalated into something darker. In that instant, she pushed through the brush, her heart hammering, the determined pulse of her soul guiding her forward. She yelled, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The figures turned toward her, surprise evident on their faces. They stared for a moment, confused, and she seized the opportunity to step closer. With every word, she laid bare her purpose, painting the darkness with her conviction. The moment stretched, a fragile web of courage threading through the chaos. She stood tall, unyielding, ready to face the fears that had shadowed her life for too long. Suddenly, one of them lunged at her and instinct took over. She was no longer just one woman, she was a force of nature. She sidestepped, her movement fluid and precise, hitting back like thunder. The others hesitated, their bravado faltering as they realized the resolve of their opponent. One by one, they rushed at her, driven by fear and fury. She fought with everything she had, every ounce of determination woven into her actions. And as the panic surged, each encounter told a story of resilience, not just her own, but that of all those who had faced darkness as well. But the odds were against her. Just as she felt the tide of despair rising, a figure emerged from the shadows. The man who had guided her appeared at her side, determination etched onto his face. He shouted, and the word reverberated within her. And so they fought side by side, and the darkness began to bend, to tremble. Each motion was a testament to the strength of connection. It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about everyone they loved, everyone who had ever felt lost and unseen. As the fire sputtered and the chaos unraveled around them, she caught a glimpse of something flickering in the darkness, a glimmer of hope. Vivid light ignited the sky, and she could feel the weight beginning to lift. With one final push, they broke through the last of the adversaries, overcoming the shadows that threatened to suffocate their hearts. The fire roared in victory, illuminating their path in the darkness. Breathless and battered, the woman felt the despair begin to ebb as the last of the opposing force finally vanished. The bodies lay still, but the energy shifted. She and her companion stood together, drenched in the exhilarating power of survival. He exclaimed, eyes wide with disbelief as he studied her. For the first time that day, she smiled fully and genuinely. She had found more than a mission and more than a lost girl. She had found purpose, connection, and a deeper understanding of herself. Looking around, she realized Eldridge held not just secrets, but the promise of redemption. Let's make sure the story continues, she said, and together they began to march toward the town, where the whispers would fade back into hope, and the warmth of the people would rise again. This time they would ride into the light, and the names of those who fight for justice would resonate in every corner of this place, pulling everyone from the shadows. She rode into town with a fierce wind at her back and no name to give. The sun dropped low in the sky, an orange globe dipping beneath the horizon, casting long shadows that twisted like fingers across the dusty streets of Kinley. At first glance, the town seemed forgotten by time, a tableau of wooden buildings leaning precariously as if whispering secrets to each other. A general store stood at the corner, its doors hanging slightly ajar, and the faint sound of a piano from the nearby saloon danced in the air, weaving through the curious murmurs that arose as she entered. The townsfolk paused, their conversations flickering out like candles snuffed by a sudden gust. They turned to her, eyes wide with a mix of intrigue and unease. She was a silhouette against the setting sun, her figure framed in a rugged, weather-worn coat, a wide-brimmed hat pulling low over her brow. No one knew her, and yet in that charged moment it felt as though she was always meant to be there. She dismounted, boots thudding on the ground, a sound as solid as the resolve that rippled through her. Though she didn't speak, her presence commanded the attention of the crowd, as if they were drawn to the force of something unspoken. Here was a woman who had seen the world, felt its pulse, and carried the weight of untold stories. Her first few steps were deliberate, scanning faces weathered by life, etched with experience. An air of tension hung like morning fog. It wasn't just curiosity, it was recognition. Deep down, each person understood that when someone like her showed up, troubles weren't far behind. The sheriff, a stout man with a face like crumpled parchment, stepped forward. "Ma'am," he called, his voice gravelly. She looked at him, and for a moment the world around them blurred. It wasn't fear that flickered in her eyes, but something bolder and unyielding determination. "I'm here to find someone," she said, her voice steady, echoing with an undercurrent of urgency. The murmurs turned to hushed tones, spreading like wildfire through the crowd. Just a few words, yet they hinted at deeper currents, lost souls, abandoned dreams. "You won't find much here," the sheriff warned, his tone cautioning, but she wasn't deterred. "Maybe I'm not looking for what you think," she replied, her gaze unwavering. With a nod, she walked past him into the saloon's dimly lit interior. The door creaked shut behind her, sealing her from the outside world. The noise fell away, replaced by the chatter of patrons who were now sizing her up, intrigued and apprehensive. A group of men were gathered around a table, scowls painted across their faces, but even they fell silent as she entered. She approached the bar, the wood polished from years of serving drinks and holding secrets. The bartender raised an eyebrow but didn't say a word, pouring her a glass of whiskey without needing to ask. The amber liquid caught the light, illuminating stories hidden in shadows. She tipped her head in thanks and brought the glass to her lips. A voice from the shadows cut through the air. A wiry man with a crooked smile slid off a bar stool, easing closer. "Maybe," she replied, her eyes narrowing. "The town doesn't take kindly to outsiders," he warned, glancing nervously over his shoulder as if the walls themselves had eyes. "I didn't come to play games," she shot back, her patience wearing thin. He paused, weighing his words. "And what if the answers bring you trouble? Kinley has a way of swallowing folks whole." This time she didn't flinch. She took another sip, feeling the warmth spread through her. "Then maybe it's time someone fought back," she said, each word a challenge spun from steel. Just then the heavy saloon door swung open again, the light spilling in like a breath of fresh air, but its arrival brought with it a new tension. A man entered, his gait purposeful, a shadow in the doorway, nearly lost to the dim light. He scanned the room and zeroed in on her instantly. "Leave before it's too late," he growled, his tone laced with menace. She asked, her voice firm, not backing down. His eyes darkened as he drew nearer. "You're digging in places that don't want to be disturbed," she challenged, tilting her chin defiantly. There was a flicker of something in his gaze, an uncertainty that broke through his hardened front. "Everything," he said simply, but there was a crack in his armor, a hint of vulnerability. She paused, studying him, and for a brief moment it felt as if the room held its breath. Something deep and personal flared between them, drawing lines of fate that seemed to tangle together, entwined with hope and desperation. She asked, but he did no fear, and in that instant she understood the weight of her own heart, heavy with stories that shaped them both. She could see it in his eyes. The ghosts of lost loved ones and haunting memories prodded at his resolve. "If you're looking for answers, there's a better way," he said, softening. She considered this, feeling the pulse of curiosity surge. And so, together they walked out into the fading light, leaving the saloon behind, the patrons watching closely as if they were witnessing the first sparks of a wildfire. They headed toward the outskirts of town, past rusted-out cars and broken fences. The buildings grew sparse and shadows cloaked the landscape, thickening like a blanket wrapped in secrets. The man led her toward a solitary cabin, nestled among the trees. "This is where it happens," he muttered, a hint of unease in his voice as he pushed open the door. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and neglect. Papers littered the floor, half-torn photographs and faded maps scattered haphazardly. "Welcome to the den of ghosts," he said, forcing a small smile in the face of the shadows. As she stepped inside, the weight of the moment pressed on her. Every piece of paper, every image whispered stories of the past, a past that spoke of loss, desperation, and hope. She turned to him, eyes blazing. He took a deep breath, the tension rising in the air. People came looking for something, signs of those who disappeared. Some found them, others didn't. Her heart quickened. "There's a group. They operate in the dark shadows that steal away the things we love." He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if the walls themselves were listening. She asked, her resolve only strengthening. "Then you'll have to tread carefully," he warned. "You're walking a fine line between life and death." "I've faced danger before, I wonder," he murmured, studying her closely, echoing words that had been spoken too often. "But fear can be a useful tool, or it keeps them trapped," she countered. As they spoke, the sunlight disappeared entirely, leaving only the pale glow of the moon. It cast flickering shadows inside the cabin, stirring memories and dreams, drawing courage from the depths of uncertainty. Outside, the town seemed alive with whispers, stories woven into the very fabric of the night. She felt an unmistakable energy, a pulse of the unspoken that thrummed beneath the surface. "We have to confront them," she said, determination etched across her features. "No," he said sharply, "you don't understand." "Maybe," she replied, "but I can't back down." There was a long silence, the two of them locked in a battle of wills. "Fine, but if we're doing this, we need a plan," he relented, crossing his arms defiantly. As they plotted, they became allies forged in the heat of purpose. Each word ignited layers of understanding, creating a bond that pulsed with intensity, the sort that brings people closer when facing the unknown. Outside, the world draped in shadows felt alive, full of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Together, they moved back to town, lesser fears now clinging to their heels like shadows. They exchanged glances, allies in a treacherous game, holding hands with courage. With each step toward the reckoning, she felt emboldened. They approached the center of Kinley, the moonlight illuminating the way. Figures loomed in the distance, gathered around the flickering flame of a bonfire, its light dancing wildly against the night. She could sense the darkness lurking just under the surface, a dangerous kind of power twisting memories and lives into threads of despair. "Remember," he warned, his voice low but urgent, "we stand firm." With each heartbeat, she felt the swirling storm within her, a fury born from loss and longing. They merged toward the fire, and as the light flickered, revealing the faces of their adversaries, she understood the stakes. The leader, a man with cold eyes that shone like shards of glass, stepped forward, surprise washing over his features. "I'm not afraid of your shadows," she stated firmly, her voice steady, ringing out against the raucous laughter that grew quieter. The flicker of surprise transformed into a smirk, a twisted smile that oozed confidence. "Truth, I have to try," she replied, lifting her chin. With those words, the energy shifted. A murmur spread like wildfire, unsettled energy crackled in the night air. Their collective gaze turned toward her, measuring her grit against the darkness that loomed. The leader sneered. She interrupted, her voice fierce, echoing against the night. She could feel the surge of defiance ripple through her, infecting the air. The tension thickened, momentarily blinding the world around them. Her eyes darted, catching whispers of dissent from the onlookers. The cabin, the papers, the stories, it was all leading to this moment, her moment of confrontation. "Then let's see how brave you really are," the leader challenged, stepping forward, arms crossed defiantly. With every heartbeat, she felt her connection to the crowd. This wasn't just about her courage, but about everyone who had been silenced. Every whisper of fear that was woven into their souls surged back to the forefront. The real fight wasn't just against the leader. It was for the lives that had been lost, for all the names that had vanished into thin air. One by one, the townsfolk began to stir, uncertainty transforming into strength. The tides were shifting, they were tired of living under the weight of shadows. Together, they stood with her, united against a darkness that had tried to consume them. With adrenaline coursing through her veins, she stepped closer, locking eyes with the leader. And as the battle lines were drawn, her heart surged with conviction. Her voice rang out, a rallying cry for change, for every heart that still beat for justice. In that moment, surrounded by allies and whispers of the lost, she became more than just a woman with no name. She became a force of nature. In the tremors of night, hope sparked like wildfire, illuminating the way as they charged into the fray together, driven by a fierce belief, a belief that the darkness could be challenged, the shadows could be cast aside. They fought not just for themselves, but for every soul intertwined in the intricate web of life, stories waiting to be told, voices yearning to be heard. She fought with fire, with notes of lived experiences coloring her every move, and in that chaotic beauty, her name suddenly resonated. She became more than just a stranger. She emerged as a beacon of truth, illuminating Kinley, reminding them all that sometimes the fight for justice starts with one person carrying nothing but the strength of their resolve. She rode into town with no name to give, but the whispers followed her like shadows. The sun hung low, a fiery orange orb casting long, deceptive shadows over the dusty streets of Rockford. It was a town trapped in the grip of its own stories woven into the cracked facades of buildings, stories lost in the winds that swept through the eerily quiet alleyways. As soon as she dismounted, a hush swept over the remnants of conversation. The local gossip, thick as molasses, spread through the crowd. She was a presence, an enigma wrapped in a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat, her face partially hidden from view. The horses nickered nervously, sensing the tension in the air. With every step, she felt the weight of 100 eyes on her, assessing and judging, curiosity mingling with suspicion. Someone whispered, breaking the silence like a twig underfoot. "Don't know," came the reply, laced with unease. In that instant, the sheriff emerged, a barrel-chested man named Colt, whose hardened face bore the lines of many storms. He asked, his voice deep and gravelly, a hint of caution lacing his words. "I'm looking for someone," she replied, her tone confident, unwavering. Colt's eyes narrowed, trying to gauge her resolve. She met his gaze undeterred. The townsfolk murmured again, insecurity seeping into their hearts. The truth was a dangerous thing in places like this. No one wanted to stir the pot, yet here she was, challenging the very foundation of their silent existence. With a slight nod, Colt stepped aside, allowing her to pass through the crowd that reluctantly parted. As she walked toward the saloon, she couldn't help but catch fragments of their conversations. Words like trouble and danger danced through her ears, wrapping around her like a cloak. The saloon door creaked open, the scent of whiskey and stale smoke hitting her like a wave. The room was dimly lit, filled with rough men occupying crooked stools, their laughter brittle and nervous. Conversations halted as her presence filled the space, a fire igniting behind her determined eyes. She approached the bar, leaning slightly, her voice smooth yet commanding as she ordered a drink. The bartender, a grizzled man with a patchy beard, stared at her, then slid a glass her way, his brows furrowed. He asked, skeptical. "I'm here for answers," she said, taking a sip of whiskey, letting the warmth roll through her. She sensed the walls between her and the townsfolk beginning to crack, the tension slowly ebbing. He replied, half joking, yet there was a seriousness in his tone that caught her attention. "I don't think," she said, her gaze steady. With that, the door swung open again, interrupting their moment. A man burst in, wild-eyed and out of breath. He shouted, his voice echoing in the silence that followed. He continued, panic lacing his words. The air thickened, a mixture of fear and disbelief gripping the room. She asked, moving toward him, her heart racing. "Paige Miller," he gasped, looking at her as if he recognized a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "She disappeared 3 days ago." Those words struck like lightning, igniting a fire in her chest. "Take me there," she demanded without hesitation, her heart pounding with urgency. The man exchanged glances with the bartender, who shook his head as if warning against it. "You don't want to do that," one of the patrons said, a man with a scar running down his cheek. His voice dripped with disdain. "I'm not here to play a hero," she said, her voice steady, unyielding. "I'm here to find the truth." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a flicker of admiration battling the underlying fear. The man with wild eyes nodded, looking determined. "I'll take you," he said, pushing back from the bar. She followed him outside, the weight of the townsfolk's gazes lingering like clouds of doubt. The sun was sinking lower, shadows growing longer, and as they ventured away from the town center, daylight faded into a dim blanket of dusk. The path to the old barn wound through thickening brush, the deepening shadows swallowing them whole. With every step, she felt the air grow heavier, thick with secrets and buried sorrows. "People say the barn is cursed," he whispered, his voice quaking. "Curses are just stories," she replied, though even she felt a shiver crawl up her spine. By the time they reached the barn, the sun had vanished completely. The only light came from a pale moon overhead, filtering through broken slats in the barn's decaying structure. A chill surged through her. This place exuded a sense of foreboding, a whispering echo of all the lost souls that had wandered here. He asked, hesitating at the threshold. "I won't leave until I uncover the truth," she said, steeling herself and stepping inside. As she entered, the musty smell clawed at her senses. Dust hung like a shroud, and the dim light revealed old equipment, rusty tools, and piles of forgotten hay. "Let's split up," she suggested, her voice steady. He exclaimed, panic flaring in his voice. "Then stay close," she replied, moving deeper inside, her heart beating loud enough for both of them. She could feel every heartbeat, every fear that lived in the shadows. They wandered through the barn, each creak of the floor sending ripples of anxiety through the air. The silence was stretching like a taut string ready to snap. She could hear her own breath, each inhale laced with anticipation, each exhale a prayer for courage. He called suddenly, his voice cracking. She rushed over to him, her pulse racing. He pointed to an old, battered trunk in the corner, half hidden under faded blankets. They exchanged wary looks before she knelt down and pried it open. Inside, she found a collection of tarnished jewelry, some photographs, and a small notebook with frayed edges. She pulled it out and began flipping through the pages. She murmured, her heart plunging as she scanned line after line of names missing people, one after another, each entry a litany of lost lives. "We have to show this to someone," he said, his voice trembling with urgency. She nodded, but as she looked up, a rustling drew her attention. From the shadows emerged a figure, a man cloaked in the darkness, eyes gleaming with malice. The atmosphere shifted, a cold dread settled like a stone in her stomach. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said, his voice smooth but threatening. She demanded, steadied by a force beyond her. "Just a friend," he replied, taking a step closer. "But you're getting in over your head." She spat, adrenaline surging through her. "Bold words for a stranger," he sneered, stepping into the dim light. At that moment her heart raced not out of fear, but from the burning flame of defiance. The past had its grip on her, but she wouldn't relent. "Whatever game you think you're playing, it ends here," she said, her voice steady, unwavering against the swelling darkness around her. "What do you think you'll do? You're alone," he laughed, but she could sense his trepidation. "No," she retorted, "I have the truth." Suddenly the man lunged, moving in a blur of motion. In that moment time slowed, and she felt the adrenaline course through her veins. With a fierce shout, she dodged to the side, heart pounding against her chest, her instincts igniting. Her companion shouted as he charged, tackling the man to the ground in a flurry of limbs. They rolled, the struggle becoming a whirlwind of kicks and punches. Panic surged through her, but she couldn't back down. She grabbed the nearest rusted Tula heavy wrench and rushed in to help, adrenaline sharpening her actions. In the skirmish, her heart raced, the very act of fighting igniting purpose within her. With every swing, she felt the weight of every name in that notebook behind her, propelling her forward, the stories, the histories, the dreams that had been silenced too soon. Finally, they took him down, pinning him against the cold wooden floor. Gasping for breath, he glared up at them, eyes filled with fury and disbelief. "That was a mistake," he spat, struggling against them. "No," she said firmly, leaning down to meet his gaze. With that, they bound his hands with the very ropes that lay nearby, a sign of both restraint and justice. Exhausted but resolute, they stood, the bar now heavy with the weight of their victory. As they gathered the notebook and stared out at the beckoning darkness outside, she felt the tide was beginning to turn. "Now we take this back to town," she said, heart pounding fiercely in her chest, a medley of triumph and hope. Together they made their way back, the notebook pressed tightly against her chest like a lifeline. The night air felt alive, electric with possibility, as shadows danced around them. Stepping into the town center, the moonlight now illuminated the faces of the townsfolk, expressions ranging from disbelief to curiosity. As they emerged, word spread quickly, people gathering to witness this moment, a reckoning of sorts. Colt demanded, stepping forward, concern etching lines into his forehead. "It's true," she said, raising the notebook high. "Too many people have disappeared under the weight of fear." "No more," gasps echoed through the crowd, and that spark of rebellion ignited a fire in their hearts. No longer would they be mere shadows in their own lives. The shadows began to ebb as faces transformed from uncertainty into determination. It was a ripple effect, a surge of hope fueled by shared stories and a collective resolve. "Let's stand together," she urged, her voice growing stronger. That night they began to gather names, the names in the notebook igniting their collective strength. Every lost life mattered, reminding them of the power that resided in unity. The fight was far from over, but she had ignited a flame, a beacon of courage illuminating the darkness that had held sway over Rockford for too long. And as she stood among the people, the townsfolk began to cheer, not just for her but for the truth, for their freedom, and for the future they could reclaim together. She may have entered without a name, but in that moment she discovered something far greater. She found a purpose etched in the hearts of those around her, a legacy of courage that would resonate for years to come. She was no longer a stranger, she was hope incarnate, and the town would never be the same again. She rode into town with no name to give, a figure clad in dust and mystery. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, slanted shadows across the wooden buildings of Silver Creek. The air was heavy with unspoken tension, an electric feeling that wrapped around the townsfolk, tightening like a noose. Whispers snaked through the streets like smoke. They pointed and stared, curiosity dancing with fear. As she reined her horse to a halt, the dust swirled around her like a ghostly shroud. She was not just another traveler, she was a storm brewing, and the people of Silver Creek sensed it. In the stillness of that late afternoon, everything felt poised on a knife's edge. With her dark hair whipping in the wind and her wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over her eyes, she surveyed the square. The locals stood still, frozen in place like forgotten statues. Children peeked through their mothers' skirts, eyes wide with awe. An old man croaked to no one in particular, his voice crackling with years of fear and suspicion. An angry woman shot back. "She's just another stranger." Ignoring the whispers, she stepped down from her horse, landing with a gentle thud on the dusty ground. Each step she took echoed in the silence like a drumbeat, each footfall announcing her defiance. The sheriff, a stout man with a thick mustache and a sour expression, emerged from the saloon, hands resting warily on his hips. He asked, his voice steady, her gaze locked with his, unyielding and intense. "I'm looking for someone," she said, her voice smooth with an undercurrent of purpose. He blinked, taken aback by her audacity. "You best be careful, miss," she inquired, raising an eyebrow. The townspeople held their breath, watches of uncertainty flickering in their eyes. In that moment she sensed their fear, a fear that wrapped around them like a heavy cloak. It was a fear bred from loss, from secrets hidden too long, and she felt the weight of it pressing down on her shoulders. "You don't know what you're getting into," the sheriff warned, his tone thick with caution. "I just want to find the truth," she replied, her voice unwavering. With a stiff nod, the sheriff stepped aside, revealing the path into the heart of the town. The murmurings grew louder as she strode past the onlookers, their eyes tracking her every move, curiosity mingling with suspicion. She entered the saloon, the wooden door creaking as it swung open. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of cheap whiskey and stale smoke. Rough men sat hunched over tables, murmuring to each other, their laughter coarse and bitter. When she stepped in, conversations faltered and eyes shifted towards her, sizing her up with a blend of fear and intrigue. At the bar, a tired bartender cleaned a glass, his eyes darting up to meet hers. He asked, his voice gruff. "Water," she said, and as he poured the drink, she allowed herself a moment to absorb the atmosphere. Patrons exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of disbelief and apprehension. The bartender slid the glass across the bar and she caught it easily, raising it to her lips. "You seem like you're not from around here," he said, watching her closely. She replied, meeting his gaze with quiet intensity. "You're looking for trouble," he warned, his voice a mere whisper, almost drowned out by the low hum of conversations. "No," she said firmly, "I'm here to find answers." With those words, the door swung open again and a young man rushed in, breathless and frantic. He shouted, urgency igniting the saloon. Everything fell silent as all eyes turned toward him. He stood in the doorway, the light framing him like a tragic hero fresh from battle. "Paige," he gasped, his chest heaving. "They've taken her." The saloon erupted into chaos. Men jumped to their feet, shouting questions, others rushing to gather their guns. The bartender grimaced as he wiped a hand across his forehead, the tension in the air leaping toward its breaking point. The sheriff bellowed, attempting to impose order. Everyone settled down. The young man cried, emotion breaking his voice. "They don't care about us." The raw power in his voice sent shivers down her spine. She felt the collective fear and despair of the townsfolk coalesce into a palpable energy, an energy that demanded action. "Take me to the Miller place," she said, cutting through the noise, her voice steady. The young man replied, surprise lighting his eyes. "Take me to where she was last seen," she repeated, locking her gaze with his. He hesitated for just a moment, then nodded, determination flooding his features. "Okay, but it's dangerous," he warned. "Neither do you," she shot back, a fierce fire igniting within her. With that, they rushed outside, regrouping the townsfolk. She could see the flickering hope in some eyes, mixed with skepticism, yet it didn't deter her. The sun was beginning to sink behind the horizon, streaks of red and gold painting the sky, casting an eerie glow over the fading daylight. As they rode toward the Miller place, the youthful man's hands shook on the reins, the tension crunching the air around them. She asked, sensing his mounting fear. "Legend has it, some call them the Shadows," he admitted, his voice low. "They've been said to take people who threaten their power." "Shadows don't scare me," she replied, yet inside she felt a stirring mix of apprehension and resolve. "We all have fears." The road twisted through the plains, every rock and creek amplifying the silence as the world darkened. They neared a rickety old barn, the air thick with neglect, a sentinel of forgotten promises. "Stay close," the young man urged, fear seeping out in his whispered tones. They dismounted, the moonlight spilling into the alley of the barn, illuminating the creaky floorboards. It felt as if the very walls could speak, filled with tales of those who had braved through these shadows before. "Over there," he pointed toward a rotting door. Her heart raced as she approached the door, the ancient wood groaning under her touch. She pushed it open, stepping inside, the soft light revealing a scene of forgotten belongings, overturned furniture, and dusty relics of lives unraveling. The young man called, his voice breaking the eerie silence. No answer came but the echo of their voices bouncing off the walls. Something primal stirred within her, a mix of fear and instinct urging her onward. She moved deeper into the barn, feeling every shadow pushing against her like an unseen force. Suddenly a noise, a faint cry, barely audible, pierced the heavy air. The young man's face paled and they both turned toward the sound, hearts racing. She exclaimed, rushing toward the sound, adrenaline fueling her every step. They scrambled through the darkness, following the whispers that seemed to dance in the shadows. Each step felt laden with purpose, every heartbeat amplifying the urgency driving them onward. As they rounded a corner, they stumbled into a dimly lit room, and there, bound to a chair, was Paige, a young woman with wide, frightened eyes. Tears streaked her dirt-smudged face, and relief flooded over the young man like sunlight breaking through the clouds. He breathed, rushing forward, but as they approached, a chilling laugh echoed through the space. A figure plunged from the shadows, grinning with a sense of sick triumph. The young man froze, eyes widening in dread. He yelled, but the man, presumably the leader of the shadows, stepped protectively in front of Paige, dark eyes glinting with malice. He retorted, swaggering over. "She's nothing but a pawn in my game." She shot back, her voice laced with defiance. His smile flickered, a brief moment of uncertainty sneaking through his bravado. "You think you have power here," but she remained undeterred, something fiercer igniting in her. "You underestimate the light," she said. The leader's laughter filled the room, but it felt brittle, thin. "And what will you do?" "I won't just fight you," she declared, stepping forward, careful but resolute. In a split-second decision, she grasped the young man's arm, their eyes locking in unspoken understanding. They charged forward, fueled by a bond forged in desperation and determination. The fight was chaotic, breaths mingling with adrenaline, every movement a dance between light and darkness. In the frenzy, she saw an opportunity. As the shadows advanced, she threw a nearby old lantern, shattering it against the ground. The flames erupted, flickering to life and illuminating the room with a warm glow. She yelled, summoning strength from within herself and the townsfolk outside. The leader staggered, caught off guard as the flames flickered around him. He shouted, panic threading into his voice. The young man shouted, rushing forward to unbind her as chaos erupted. Together, they fought against the creeping shadows, feeling their fear ebb away, replaced by raw determination. With one final push, they overwhelmed the darkness. Paige's bonds shattered, and she stood, adrenaline igniting a newfound strength within her. Together, they faced the leader, who backed away, realizing they were no longer powerless. "Your time is over," she declared, stepping forward. With the flames flickering behind them, the shadows receded, unable to hold their grip. The leader, once filled with arrogance, turned to flee into the night, knowing he had lost the battle. The barn echoed with their victorious breaths. They stood united, a trio forged in hope and determination, bound by a shared purpose. Outside, the townspeople waited, a mix of fear and hope etched on their faces. They shouted, disbelief morphing into jubilance. "I didn't do it alone," she replied, breathless but invigorated. In that moment, she felt the weight of the town's history and pain, each soul woven into her resolve like threads of light. The night began to lighten as dawn painted the sky with hope. The battle against the darkness was not yet over, but they had sparked a fire within themselves, a courage to face the shadows that loomed. As they turned towards Silver Creek, she realized she no longer rode into town with no name. In the eyes of the townsfolk, she had become something more, an embodiment of resilience, an untamed spirit that refused to be silenced. The journey had only just begun, but she felt the pulse of promise renewing, the light of hope shining brighter than ever, ready to combat whatever darkness lay ahead. In Silver Creek, a new chapter had begun, illuminated by the bravery of those who dared fight back, united against the shadows forever after. She rode into town without a name to give, and the very air shimmered with electric tension. Dust rose in gentle whirlwinds as her horse's hooves pounded the dry earth, announcing her presence like a drumbeat. The sun hung low in the sky, splashing the town of Cobalt with a palette of fiery orange and deep purple, but no sunset could mute the whispers that filled the streets. A group of townsfolk stood outside the saloon, their conversations fading into silence as they caught sight of her. The first impression was striking, a woman clad in a long, dark coat that danced with the wind like a mythical figure, her hat pulled low to shield her eyes. Every part of her seemed to emanate a relentless energy, a ripple of intrigue that pierced the surface of everyday life. A voice murmured, almost trembling with curiosity. "Trouble, that's what she is," another replied, crossing their arms defiantly. The sheriff stepped forward, stocky and stern, his eyes narrowing like a hawk assessing its prey. His voice was a mixture of authority and caution, an unspoken warning hidden beneath his words. "I'm looking for someone," she answered, her voice low and steady, cutting through the murmurs like a knife. The sheriff's brow furrowed deeper, a flicker of concern crossing his face. This town isn't safe for wanderers, but she didn't flinch. Instead, her gaze intensified, a fire igniting behind her eyes. "I don't turn back from what I've come for," she declared, each word dripping with conviction. The crowd hesitated, teetering between fear and fascination. There was something magnetic about her presence, as if she carried the weight of countless stories in her bones. As she stepped further into the heart of Cobalt, she could feel the townsfolk's eyes on her, a mixture of awe, wariness, and something deeper, a flicker of hope, perhaps. Hope was often the first casualty in a town like this, where shadows loomed large. Saloon doors swung open and creaked, announcing her entrance to a room filled with the scent of spilled whiskey and stale smoke. The atmosphere changed instantly as rough men turned their heads, eyes glistening with intrigue and suspicion. She made her way to the bar, the worn wooden counter gleaming under the dim light. The bartender, an old man with graying hair and weary eyes, raised an eyebrow. He asked. "Water," she replied, her voice cutting through the haze. As he filled a glass, she took a moment to scan the room. She needed information, and these men had stories locked away behind their hardened faces. "You don't look like you belong here," one man grunted from a corner table, his voice rough and edged with disdain. "And you don't look like you should be judging a stranger," she fired back, her tone sharp as a blade. She took the glass of water, feeling the coolness seep into her skin. Before she could sip, the saloon doors burst open again. This time, a breathless figure stumbled in, a young girl with dirt-streaked cheeks and wide, terrified eyes. "Help," she cried, her voice a fragmented plea slicing through the smoky air. The room fell into an uneasy silence, all eyes shifting to the girl whose fear was palpable, as thick as the dust on the floor. "What do you mean?" the sheriff asked, his voice steady but the furrow in his brow deepening. "There's a group up in the hills, they come at night and they take people." The girl's voice wavered, quaking with raw emotion. She felt the tide of emotions swell around her, a mix of despair and urgency electrifying the air. This was not just a local legend, it was a cry for help, a desperate plea that resonated deep within her core. She set the glass down, feeling her heart race. Without hesitation, she turned toward the crowd, her voice rising. "I'll go." The sheriff frowned, uncertainty playing on his face. "It's dangerous up there." "I don't care," she insisted, her voice rising like a wildfire. "You can stand back and watch, or you can join me." There was a moment of silence, a hesitation weighed down by fear. Then the young girl stepped forward, eyes filled with both admiration and desperation. "I'll show you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The sheriff hesitated for a heartbeat longer before reluctantly nodding. They gathered their horses, each prepared for the journey that lay ahead. The tight-knit tension hung in the air like the stillness before a storm. As they rode out of the town, she felt the weight of both the girl and the townsfolk's hopes resting squarely on her shoulders, and she refused to falter. The path wound through thick brush and rocky terrain, every hoofbeat echoing through the silence. As they drew nearer to the hills, the evening sky filled with shades of blue and purple, shadows dancing and flickering against the backdrop of the ominous landscape. The sheriff asked once more, glancing nervously at the girl. She shot back, her voice unwavering. They pressed on, the tension thickening with every passing minute. The air grew cooler, the silence punctuated only by the distant sounds of rustling leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl, as if the night itself held its breath in anticipation. Finally, they reached a clearing where the ground sloped steeply. At the top, silhouetted against the moonlit sky, she could make out the outline of a dilapidated cabin, the supposed lair of the shadows. "Stay back," she whispered to the young girl as they dismounted and crept forward. Her heart raced, and she could feel the tendrils of fear inching back, but she pushed them aside. Every ounce of her being was focused on finding the truth. As they approached, the moonlight illuminated the cabin's broken windows, casting eerie shadows that danced on the forest floor. The cabin felt alive, filled with the weight of every soul that had been lost to the darkness. "Listen," she urged, pressing her ear against the door. Footsteps echoed inside, heavy and foreboding. "I need you both to stay quiet." Before she could finish, the door creaked open. A grim figure emerged, a man cloaked in darkness, his face obscured. He surveyed the surroundings, a predatory gaze scanning the area. Suddenly, she felt a surge of adrenaline. She hissed, grabbing the young girl's wrist, but the girl's eyes widened in fear. "No," she pleaded. "I know," she replied, keeping her voice low and steady. "We'll get her." Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open slightly, peering inside. The cabin was dimly lit, shadows dancing against the walls. There, tied to a chair in the far corner, was the girl's sister Mia. She was unconscious, her face pale, lips chapped. "Stay here," she said to the others, before slipping inside the cabin, heart pounding like thunder in her chest. As she crept towards Mia, the man from outside walked back in and they locked eyes, a moment of stillness that felt like an eternity. He growled, his voice dripping with menace. "A friend of theirs," she said, trying to sound calm, but she wrung her hands nervously behind her back. He laughed, a bitter, harsh sound. "It's not just about her," she replied, drawing courage from deep within. With a sudden movement, he lunged toward her, but she was quicker, dancing to the side as she grabbed a nearby lantern off a rickety table. She swung it with all her might, hitting him squarely in the shoulder. Stumbled back, cursing in surprise and pain, giving her just enough time to rush to Mia and cut the ropes binding her. She urged, shaking the girl gently. Mia's eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding her gaze. "No time," she said, helping her to her feet. At that moment, the man roared, fury etched across his face as he charged again. She grasped Mia's hand and they raced for the door, adrenaline propelling them forward. They burst out into the night air, the coolness refreshing against the chaos. But the man was quick on their heels, and when they reached the edge of the clearing, they heard a shout. He bellowed, his rage echoing through the trees. They sprinted, the ground uneven beneath their feet as branches whipped past them, sharp as thorns. She could feel their hearts pounding in unison, fear blending with a primal urge to survive. The cabin loomed behind them, its shadows clawing at their heels as the figure dashed after them. Mia cried, her voice laced with terror. "Trust me," she yelled, grasping Mia's hand more tightly. As they weaved through the trees, she felt the weight of the world crashing down behind her, the darkness clawing at her mind, but she wouldn't allow fear to take hold. Each breath was a vow to fight, each step an affirmation that they wouldn't be trapped. Suddenly, she spotted the young girl and the sheriff waiting by the horses, the shadows of the trees cloaking them. She shouted, leading Mia toward them. The sheriff's eyes widened in disbelief as they approached, urgency dancing in the air. He shouted, scrambling to assist. "No time," she gasped, her voice ragged as adrenaline coursed through her veins. The moment they reached the horses, they swung up onto the saddles, fear and urgency melding into a single heartbeat. The moment the sheriff spurred his horse into motion, they shot off into the night, pounding against the earth as the darkness receded behind them. The wind rushed past, a cacophony of sound and speed that drowned out the shadows threatening to catch up. She could feel the young girl's heart racing alongside hers, the taste of freedom enveloping them like a warm embrace. As they reached the town limits, they slowed, glancing back briefly. The cabin faded into the darkness, a haunting silhouette against the night sky. "We did it," the young girl breathed, her voice choked with emotion. "That wasn't just luck," the sheriff said, glancing at the woman who had led them all into the heart of danger. They descended from their horses, trembling limbs alive with the adrenaline of their escape. The townsfolk were gathering at the edge of the town, uncertainty staining their faces as they watched the unlikely heroes return. As she took a step forward, she could feel their eyes on her, no longer filled with suspicion, but rather something akin to admiration. She turned to the young girl beside her. "Your sister is safe." Relief washed over the girl's features, sunlight breaking through the shadows that had loomed for too long. She exclaimed, clutching her sister's hand, their bond woven tighter in that moment. The sheriff stepped forward, offering a hand to her. "You didn't have to put yourself at risk." "But you didn't," she retorted, meeting his gaze with newfound strength. "Sometimes it takes someone outside to ignite the fire." The murmurs began again, but this time they were different. Maybe she had ridden into Cobalt without a name, but she had returned with something far more powerful: purpose. The sun slipped over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the town, a promise of a brighter future just beyond reach. As the night unfolded, people gathered to share stories, united under the shared weight of their experiences. Fear began to dissipate, replaced with the desire for change. Seeing the hope in their eyes, she realized she wouldn't be leaving anytime soon. The town needed someone to fill the gaps, to guide them through the dark. And in that moment she understood. Cobalt had become more than a stopping point, it had become a home. And she would stand beside its people, forging a new path into the light, ready to confront whatever darkness dared to return. She rode into town with no name to give, her silhouette cutting against the vivid sunset like a brushstroke on a canvas. The small town of Cedar Hollow, perched at the edge of the prairies, lay quiet as if it held its breath in anticipation. Dust swirled around her horse's hooves and settled like a shroud, cloaking the weary townsfolk who emerged from their doorways, their eyes drawn to this stranger. In a place where faces told stories of struggle and resilience, hers was an enigma. A worn leather coat hugged her figure, the brim of her hat casting deep shadows over her features. She carried herself like a force of nature, a storm, though calm on the surface, threatening to break at any moment. As she dismounted, the creak of the saddle echoed in the heavy air, chopping through the whispers that had begun to ripple through the crowd. A veteran of the town asked, leaning heavily against the wooden railing of the saloon. "Doesn't matter," another replied, fear mingling with curiosity. She stepped forward, her eyes scanning the crowd, sensing their apprehension, maybe even a hint of resentment. But she felt none of it. Instead, a fierce determination stoked the fire inside her. With every challenge she'd faced in life, she knew that quiet resolve could often trump fear. She called out, her voice steady, carrying over the gathered townspeople. The sheriff, a burly man with a weathered face, stepped forward, crossing his arms. "We don't take kindly to strangers." "I'm looking for someone," she replied, unfazed. The townsfolk exchanged glances, and she could see the dread flickering in their eyes like dying embers. This town held secrets, shadows lurking just beyond the light. "Ain't nobody needs your trouble, miss," the sheriff said, a hint of warning in his voice, but her gaze was unrelenting. "I'm not looking for trouble, I'm looking for answers," she said firmly. There was a pause, a stillness that wrapped around them like the approaching dusk. The sheriff measured her, his expression cautiously intrigued. "Yes," she replied, her voice cool as steel. With a nod, the sheriff stepped aside, relenting just enough for her to pass. As she made her way through the crowd, hesitant murmurs followed her. She could feel their scrutiny, and it only fueled her resolve. She had come too far to turn back. The saloon doors creaked open, and she stepped inside. The dim light flickered overhead, revealing men crowded around tables, their faces lined with wear and worry. The smell of whiskey hung thick in the air, a barbed reminder of the town's struggles. Silence fell, and eyes turned toward her, evaluating, questioning. A rough-looking man at the bar caught her attention. He grunted, a challenge etched across his face. "Someone named Lily," she said, the name coming out of her mouth with an urgency that was palpable. At the mention of the name, the atmosphere shifted, tension coiling like a snake ready to strike. Murmurs broke out again, dark whispers that slithered through the stale air. The bartender asked, wiping his hands on a rag, uncertainty shimmering in his eyes. "You best forget that name." Her heart raced, a heavy pulse thudding in her chest. A shadow passed over the bartender's face. "She disappeared weeks ago. It's not the first time someone's gone missing around here." In that moment, the weight of silence thickened, pressing down on her. The stories the town held were rich and tangled, woven into the fabric of its existence, but there was more to uncover, and she could feel it in her bones. "I need to know what happened to her," she insisted, determination surging with every word. "Not a job for a woman like you," the rough man chimed in, sneering as he took a gulp from his mug. "Why? Because I'm a woman." Her voice rung with defiance, sending ripples of tension across the room. "Easy now," the sheriff warned, stepping back into the fray. "I know more than you realize," she said, her voice calm but filled with the spirit of a tempest. In that instant, the saloon erupted with nervous energy, men shifting in their seats, casting furtive glances. "Then let's say I'll join you," the bartender finally said, his tone almost begrudging, but she sensed the eagerness beneath his hesitation. A dangerous proposition, the sheriff mused, but the fire in her eyes seemed to shift the atmosphere, igniting a spark that breathed life into the weary townsfolk. They left the saloon, the bartender guiding her as the sun dipped lower, shadows stretching, morphing into something darker. As they approached the town's edge, mist rolled in, wrapping around them like a shroud. "Let's not waste time," she urged, her voice a tether to the urgency pulling them forward. They reached the remains of the old mill, a rickety building sitting ominously at the edge of a cliff. The ground around it was uneven and darkened by the weight of forgotten stories. The young bartender, whose name she learned was Jesse, eyed the mill warily. "This place has always been cursed." He trailed off. "I'm not afraid of curses," she said, her determination unwavering. As they crept closer to the mill, adrenaline surged through her veins, and she couldn't help but think about the countless people like Lily who had been lost to the shadows. She could feel their presence urging her on, an unbreakable bond between the living and the missing. Inside, the air was thick, filled with the scent of damp wood and decay. Moonlight burst through cracks in the walls, illuminating remnants of machinery, dust dancing like specters in the beams. Jesse followed closely, his breath hitching as they moved deeper into the mill. He whispered, fear flickering in his eyes. "I need to," she replied, her voice steady. Just then, a noise echoed, a faint sound that caught her attention. Both she and Jesse froze, hearts racing like drums in their chests. He whispered, eyes wide. Before she could answer, a vision flashed in her mind. Lily's laughter, carefree and light, a sound that felt far too fragile to exist in a place cluttered with despair. They pressed on, stepping carefully over broken boards and old machinery, each creak beneath them magnifying their anxiety. She could feel the pulse of history all around them, tales of those who'd been lost, trapped in a cycle of fear and darkness. Suddenly, she spotted something on the ground, a scrap of fabric stained and torn. Bending down, she picked it up, blue just like Lily's dress. This was hers, she breathed, an icy sense of dread washing over her. Before she could ponder further, they heard it again, a low rumble, this time more pronounced. The walls seemed to shake. She shouted, adrenaline surging. They bolted back the way they'd come, urgency streaming through their limbs, and just as they reached the exit, a figure loomed in the doorway. The man's voice dripped with malice, shadowy forms at his back, listening like predators poised for the kill. Frozen, she felt the crushing weight of fear threaten to pull her down. In that split second, 100 thoughts raced through her mind. It would be so easy to turn back, to slip into the comforting blanket of ignorance, but she wouldn't, not now. She shouted, stepped forward, her voice ringing with conviction. With a sudden burst of courage, she fought her way through the haze of despair. She could feel the energy of those who had been lost flaring with determination, echoing in her heart. Fools, the figure sneered, but she could see the uncertainty brewing beneath his bravado. Jesse, emboldened by her strength, stepped forward beside her, gripping her arm. He yelled, adrenaline amplifying his bravery. To their surprise, the shadowy figures behind the man hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty glancing across their faces. The fear that had gripped so many for so long was giving way to the strength of hope, and that shift could ignite a fire no darkness could withstand. Leave while you still can, the leader warned, though his voice wavered. No, we're done leaving things to chance, she said, stepping even closer. In that charged silence, as if the world held its breath, her heart thundered in her chest and fire ignited deep within her. Together, feeling the warmth of hope wrap around them, they stepped forward, refusing to back down. The shadows recoiled, darkness unraveling in the face of their combined bravery. You believe you can challenge us, the figure spat, but she could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. Not this time, she declared. As they pressed on hand in hand, the weight of their shared purpose surged. She could feel the energy of every soul lost, every name forgotten, culminating in their strength. They could break through the barriers of fear, illuminate the darkness, and reclaim their town. With a surge of courage, they moved as one, driven not just by their own desire for freedom, but by the memories of those who had come before them. They encircled the figures, forming a living wall against despair, feeling the warmth of belief radiate around them. In that moment, the air shifted, the shadows dissipated, unraveling into the night. The figure who had been their enemy shrank back, fear folding into panic as he realized he had lost his hold. There's nothing left for you here, she told him, her voice a fierce whisper. With a final glance of disbelief, he turned and fled into the night, his shadows retreating alongside him, crumbling beneath the weight of courage. As the dawn broke on Cedar Hollow, a golden light began to seep through the cracks of the old mill, bathing everything in warmth and renewal. The pulse of triumph reverberated through the air, an anthem of liberation ringing in their ears. Lily was found, hidden in the dark whispers of despair, released into the light of hope. Suddenly, cheers erupted as townsfolk emerged from the brush, faces filled with relief and wonder. The weight of the past had shifted, and the air crackled with energy. The promise of a new beginning spread through Cedar Hollow like wildfire. Jesse shouted, filled with emotion, and she felt buoyed by the force of their victory, a sense of exhilaration coursing through her veins. Yes, we did, she agreed, a smile breaking across her face, blending with the warmth of the rising sun. In that moment, it didn't matter that she had ridden into town with no name. The weight of what she had fought for crystallized within her. She was now part of something larger. Cedar Hollow had changed that day, and so had she. Together, as a community, they would heal the wounds of the past. They would rise above fear and grasp hold of the hope that glimmered beyond the horizon. Because sometimes it took someone from the outside to ignite the flame of change, to stir souls bound by fear into a chorus of strength ready to face the next horizon together. She rode into town with no name to give, her silhouette framed by the fading light of day. The sun dipped low on the horizon, splashing the sky with fiery hues of orange and red, while shadows stretched across the dusty streets of Delamere. A hush fell over the townsfolk, their conversations dying mid-sentence as they turned their eyes toward her. There was something about her that commanded attention. Perhaps it was the dark leather coat sweeping her legs, or the way she sat tall in the saddle, an unyielding spirit blazing within. As she dismounted, the thud of her boots on the hardened earth echoed like a drumbeat, signaling her arrival. The horses shifted restlessly, sensing the tension that hung thick in the air. The sheriff stepped forward, his imposing figure cutting through the uncertainty. "I'm looking for someone," she replied, her voice steady, imbued with determination. The sheriff narrowed his eyes, searching for something in her gaze. "Many people come looking for others," he said, "but this isn't a place for outsiders to meddle." She squared her shoulders, feeling the weight of 1,000 untold stories pressing down on her. "It's already dangerous," she said, her voice rising just above the din of the crowd. The townspeople exchanged glances, their curiosity piqued by her fierce resolve. There was a flicker of something in their eyes, hope mixed with fear. He asked finally, softening his guard just a fraction. "A girl named Emma," she stated, her voice now resolute. "She disappeared 3 days ago." The sheriff sighed, considering her request, and she could feel the tension in the air shift. "The last sighting was near the old quarry." "Follow me," he said reluctantly, and she felt a rush of gratitude. But she could sense that not everyone in the crowd was ready to believe. As they moved through the dusty streets, the townsfolk watched closely, whispering behind their hands. "You can't trust her," one voice complained. "Or she could be the answer we've been waiting for," another replied, a note of hope threading through their words. They arrived at the edge of town, where the terrain shifted from dusty streets to rocky outcrops. The sun had set and darkness swallowed the landscape whole. She kept pace with the sheriff, her heart racing, feeling the weight of both duty and fear pressing against her chest. He asked, breaking the silence. "I didn't come to hide, I came to fight," she said fiercely. The sheriff regarded her, torn between admiration and caution. "Then let's find out," she replied, her voice firm. "I've faced my share of difficulties." As they approached the old quarry, the air felt charged, as if electricity crackled just beneath the surface. Faint echoes of laughter traveled through the night, taunting them from somewhere deep within the shadows. "Listen," the sheriff whispered, raising a hand. It was still an eerie calm pervading the quarry. They moved cautiously, shadows flickering like ghosts at the edges of their vision. Each step took her deeper into the abyss. She called out, her voice breaking the stillness. Silence responded. The sheriff glanced back at her. "We should turn back," he urged, concern etched on his face, but she pressed on. "No." Just then, a flicker of movement caught her eye. Out from the darkness, a figure emerged, stumbling through the quarry. It was a boy, grime-covered and ragged, but alive. He cried, collapsing to his knees in front of them, eyes wide with fear. She demanded, kneeling beside him. "Some men," he stammered, voice shaking. "They said they were helping, but they took her away." The gravity of his words thundered in the silence. She felt the anger bubbling to the surface, intertwining with despair. He sobbed, trembling, "Into the woods." The sheriff frowned, glancing at her. "We need to get him back to town." She interrupted, mind racing. "We can't leave her there." The sheriff asked, frustration lacing his voice. She took a deep breath, grounding herself. "We can't let fear guide our actions." The sheriff hesitated, then looked back at the boy. "Why, yes," he stammered, nodding eagerly. With determination fueling her steps, she grasped the boy's hand and urged him to his feet. They moved cautiously, the shadows thickening around them as they navigated through the underbrush. The hills were alive with the sound of rustling leaves, each crackle echoing the truths left unspoken. "Stay close," she warned, casting glances around them, every instinct screaming alerts. She could feel the weight of the situation, a past riddled with loss, regret, and pain, but with each step, resolve grew stronger. They were not about to let another child slip into darkness. As they chased after the fading echoes of laughter, they soon reached the edge of a small clearing lit faintly by flickering lanterns. Her heart sank at the sight of a group of rough-looking men huddled around a fire, their faces shadowed by the glow. The boy whispered, pointing. She turned to the sheriff, anxiety cresting like waves. "We have to strategize." "Fine," he nodded, glancing back. "We create a distraction," she suggested, glancing toward the underbrush. The sheriff asked, concern pooling in his voice. "There's no other way," she said, feeling the adrenaline coursing through her veins. They plotted quietly. She could feel fear nudging against her heart, but she pushed it aside. Fear had no hold over her anymore. She would fight for every soul consumed by darkness. Taking a deep breath, she and Jesse darted towards the opposite side of the clearing while the sheriff moved through the shadows, ready to act. The men were engrossed in their conversation, careless in their confidence. She shouted, her voice loud and challenging, rising above the whispering trees. The men turned, startled, eyes narrowing in surprise. One growled, rising to his feet, a dangerous grin spreading across his face. "Someone who's not going to let you take any more lives," she declared, heart racing as she feigned bravery. "Stick around, sweetheart. We'd love to show you how we really run things around here," he sneered, his buddies laughing. A voice rang out from the shadows. The sheriff burst forth, charging into the clearing, his weapon drawn. In that instant, chaos erupted. The men scrambled, surprised by the sudden turn of events. She felt the surge of adrenaline course through her, clenching her fists. Jesse shouted, charging into the fray. As pandemonium took hold, she leaped into action, tackling the nearest man to the ground. The fight was chaotic, blows exchanged amidst the flickering shadows, every movement filled with desperation and energy. This was not just a fight for survival, it was a fight for life itself. The sheriff engaged with one of the men, matching strength with strength. She could feel the tension rise, the painful history of Cedar Hollow tangled with the battle of the moment. Somewhere in the background, she caught a glimpse of Emma, bound but alive, her wide eyes filled with terror. She screamed. With fierce determination, she shoved the man off her, scrambling toward Emma, dodging the chaos as fists flew around her. The heat of the struggle pulsed through the air, fueled by tension and raw energy. Just as she reached Emma, a sudden crackle echoed through the trees, a gunshot. Her heart stopped as the world paused. The sheriff yelled, diving to the ground as the men scattered, caught off guard. The moment of stillness was electric, time stretching like a taut string. She shouted to Emma, untying the bonds around her wrists. Now, but Emma hesitated, fear clouding her expression. No time. She urged, her voice firm, igniting that spark of hope within the frightened girl. Emma took off running, and she propelled forward, her feet pounding against the earth, adrenaline igniting every nerve. They dashed deeper into the woods, hearts racing, the sounds of chaos fading behind them. Behind them, the men were shouting, their frustration palpable. The shadows stretched longer, thick with the remnants of fear. They reached a thicket, and she quickly turned to Emma. "You have to keep running." Emma cried, desperation rising in her voice. She promised, swallowing the knot of fear in her throat. As Emma darted into the underbrush, she turned back just as the men emerged from the trees. Faces twisted with rage, they locked onto her, and she felt her heart hammering. She yelled, standing strong even as her insides quaked. "You want me?" They charged, and she sprinted away, adrenaline pushing her legs like pistons. The shadows thrashed behind her, but she wasn't going to let fear dictate her actions. She was not that person anymore. As she weaved through the trees, she breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the world rush forward with each heartbeat. The shadows grew louder, and she knew she couldn't keep running forever. Then, with a burst of courage, she turned sharply, hiding behind a tree. Heart thumping, she pressed herself against the rough bark, waiting for them to pass. The men followed closely, their steps drawing nearer, and she could feel her breath quicken. One shouted, his voice laced with rage. She held her breath, feeling the tension build until suddenly they were there, right in front of her. As they walked past, she sprang into action, launching herself at the nearest figure, kicking out hard. The element of surprise tore through the air like a breaking chain. The leader yelled, but she was already in motion, twisting and dodging, using every ounce of strength to fight back. But they were too many, and they quickly overpowered her, dragging her away. She shouted, fighting against them, the fear threatening to overwhelm her, until she heard a sudden shout from deep in the woods. Emma's voice rang out fiercely, echoing through the trees. The men turned in surprise, and in that split second, the tide of the battle shifted. The sheriff appeared, rushing into the fray, eyes blazing with fury. Rebecca felt hope ignite within her. The sheriff shouted, charging forward, fists raised. The other men fell back, confusion flickering in their eyes. As chaos erupted once more, she kicked and pushed, fighting for her freedom, and together with the sheriff, they fought their way to the edge of the clearing. He shouted. They moved as one, adrenaline pumping through their veins, refusing to let the shadows pull them back into despair. With a final push, they broke free, escaping the grasp of the men, feeling the cool rush of dawn washing over them. As they burst out of the forest, steady ground beneath their feet, she felt exhilaration mix with exhaustion. Emma remained just a step behind, eyes wide with wonder. They reached the edge of Delamere, heartbeats thundering in synchronicity, every ounce of fear giving way to triumph. The sheriff turned to them, surprise etched across his face. "I didn't come this far to lose," she answered, catching her breath. "We have to tell everyone," Jesse chimed in, determination resonating in his voice. In a whirlwind of adrenaline and disbelief, the trio rushed back toward town, hearts pounding with both fear and exhilaration. They brought news not of darkness, but of courage and resolve, of a battle fought and won, proving once more that shadows don't have the final say. As they reached the heart of Delamere, the townsfolk gathered, faces etched with concern. She stood at the front, breathless and alive as she shared their ordeal. "We battled against the darkness," she declared, her voice echoing against the brick buildings, "but we came out stronger." Gasps erupted around her, and she felt the atmosphere crackle with energy, the heat of collective fear and hope intertwining. That day, Delamere began to change. No longer would it be defined by its shadows. Together, they forged a new path, reaching for the light, a tapestry of stories woven together with resilience. She had entered with no name to give, but she left with a legacy, one woven from courage, community, and the power of hope. In the darkness of the night, she had found her place among those who would rise again, ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead. And as she looked at the town thriving and alive, she realized that sometimes when you fight for something greater, you discover not only the strength of your own heart, but the strength of countless others, united in purpose, ready to stand against the dark. She rode into town with no name to give, but the desert wind seemed to announce her presence like a fanfare. The sun hung low in the sky, illuminating the dusty streets of Redstone with a warm glow, yet casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the ground. The townsfolk, their faces lined with years of hardship, paused in their daily routines to turn and stare. For as long as anyone could remember, Redstone had been a place of silent pain, carried in the hearts of those who lived there. They watched as she approached on horseback, her long coat billowing like a flag in the wind. Dust swirled around her horse's hooves, which pounded against the parched earth, each step echoing through an uneasy silence. A woman whispered, clutching a bundle of laundry to her chest. The others leaned in to listen, eager for stories that would shatter the monotony of their lives. "I don't know," another replied, shaking her head. The sheriff emerged from the crowd, a stout man with a demeanor that spoke of authority and caution. His eyes narrowed as he assessed the stranger riding into town, intrigued yet wary. He called, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken warning. "I'm looking for someone," she replied, her tone firm but calm. "Many people come seeking someone, but few find what they desire," he said, crossing his arms as he stood like a stone wall in front of her. "Then I guess I'll be the exception," she challenged, meeting his gaze with a defiance that made the townsfolk shift uneasily. A ripple of whispering swept through the crowd. She could feel their curiosity, their skepticism, and perhaps a glimmer of hope tangled in with their doubt. The sheriff pressed, his voice low and measured. "A girl named Lily," she stated, the name hanging in the air like a dark cloud. At the mention of that name, something shifted in the gathered crowd. Faces became ghostly pale, and the air grew thick with unspoken fears. "You should leave it be," a man from the back shouted, his voice trembling. She couldn't help but feel the weight of history resting upon them, threads of pain and suffering woven tightly into the fabric of their lives. "I won't turn back until I find out the truth," she vowed, her voice resolute and unwavering. The sheriff scanned the faces of the townsfolk, weighing the risks before him. There was something in her eyes that ignited a flicker of recognition within him, a hint of desperation that mirrored the struggles he had witnessed too many times before. With a nod, he stepped aside. "All right then." As they moved through the town, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that clung to the ground like misplaced memories. She remained alert, studying the faces of the people watching her, each one a ghost of a story left unresolved, trapped under the weight of unseen burdens. The sheriff led her toward a dilapidated building on the outskirts, a once bustling tavern now reduced to mere whispers of laughter and life. "This is where she was last seen," he said, his voice low and grim. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy, thick with the smell of stale beer and lost hopes. The air felt charged, as if the walls were listening, holding their secrets close. She stepped cautiously, glancing around the dimly lit room filled with worn wooden tables and crooked chairs. "Lily was last seen with some rough company," the sheriff explained, tension radiating from him. "They come here when the sun goes down." "I'm not afraid," she replied, her words punctuated with an unusual confidence. No fear would hold her back now. Suddenly, a loud crash shattered the atmosphere as a group of men burst through the door, their laughter hanging heavy in the air. The joviality faded as they noticed her standing there, brow furrowed, hands clenched into fists at her side. Their laughter turned to suspicion, eyes narrowing. One of them sneered, stepping forward. "I'm looking for Lily," she stated firmly, refusing to back down. The men exchanged glances, smirks spreading across their faces, but beneath that bravado simmered a tension she could feel. "You'll find nothing here, sweetheart," the leader scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension. "Maybe you're hiding something," she shot back, a fierce spark igniting in her chest. "We don't take kindly to outsiders snooping around," another man growled, cracking his knuckles. She could feel the weight of the room shift, a pressure building beneath the surface. Bravery coursed through her like fire, sparking through the silence. "Lily is nothing to you," the leader snarled, stepping closer, shadows flickering in the dim light. "Try me," she whispered, her heart racing, adrenaline pumping. No intimidation would silence her resolve. The sheriff stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of her, but she felt the strength in her own legs. He challenged, his stance firm. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed like thunder, and a shot rang out, ricocheting off the walls and sending everyone into chaos. She ducked, adrenaline surging as her instincts kicked in. The laughter turned to panic as the men scattered, confusion swirling like dust in the air. The sheriff grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. He shouted, urgency slicing through the tension. They rushed outside, the cool night air biting against her skin as they sprinted toward the cover of the alley. She could hear footsteps pounding behind them, the growls of anger reverberating through the space. The sheriff commanded, shoving her behind a stack of crates. They crouched low, breath coming in quick gasps, heartbeats synchronizing to an urgent rhythm. Through a gap in the crates, she caught sight of the figures lurking in the shadows, not just the men but something else, darker, lurking just beyond the light. She whispered, glancing at the sheriff, whose expression now held a blend of concern and determination. "Those men, they're not just thugs, they're connected to something much worse," he replied quietly, eyes scanning the darkened street. "They've taken others." That realization sent a chill spiraling through her, a mix of fear and anger boiling in her veins. "We can't let them keep doing this," she said, keeping her voice steady. "We need proof first," he murmured, but there was a fire in her gaze that made him hesitate. "Then let's find it. I didn't come this far to turn back," she insisted, refusing to back down now. With a reluctant nod, the sheriff led the way, tiptoeing through the shadows. They crept toward the tavern where the noise was still echoing, though the tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. He asked, but she felt resolve igniting within her. "Then we fight," she stated flatly. They climbed to a window ledge and peeked inside, heartbeats racing as they took in the scene. The men gathered around a table, maps spread out before them, discussing plans in hushed, urgent tones. "There, we'll meet when the moon is high," the leader said, a glint of malice in his eyes. She whispered, confusion mixing with dread. "Whatever it is, it's bigger than we thought," the sheriff murmured. Just as they were about to turn away, a figure emerged from the shadows behind the men, a girl with disheveled hair, bound and gagged Lily. A surge of panic washed over her. "Wait," the sheriff said, gripping her arm firmly. But resolve washed over her like a wave, drowning out any doubts. With adrenaline pumping, she swung the window open and jumped down, landing silently on the ground. The moment she hit the earth, she bolted toward the door, and time stretched like taffy, every second fueling her heart. One of the men shouted, spotting her, eyes wide with disbelief. She screamed, her voice resonating with raw urgency. The tavern erupted into chaos as she burst through the door. The men scrambled, confusion plastered across their faces. She rushed toward Lily Jossette, limbs moving as if guided by an unseen force. She demanded, bravely charging forward, but the leader sprang into action, stepping in front of her, a sneer curling his lips. "Watch me," she spat, her breath steadying as tension coiled in the air. In that moment, all hesitation dissolved, and she lunged forward, adrenaline flooding her system. A fight broke loose, fists flying and shouts echoing, chaos erupting like a storm. Someone yelled, but she was too quick, ducking and weaving, making her way through the tumult. The sheriff joined in, and they became a whirlwind of movement, fighting side by side against the tide of aggression. With each strike, she felt a surge of strength course through her, a fire in her bones. The sheriff shouted, rushing toward the girl, but as he grabbed her bond, a dark figure emerged from the corner, eyes glimmering maliciously. She cried. But it was too late. A fist connected with the sheriff's jaw, sending him sprawling to the floor. As panic swelled, she fought frantically, adrenaline pushing her further despite the odds. Blows flew and darkness filled her vision, but amid the chaos, she remained anchored by purpose. With a burst of determination, she grabbed the nearest object, a heavy bottle from the floor, and swung it with all her might toward the man threatening the sheriff. The bottle shattered upon impact, and for a brief instant, silence fell as everyone registered the turn of events. The tension shifted, confusion swirling like a tempest around them. She yelled, stepping forward, fists raised. The men hesitated, eyes darting among each other, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. It was a fleeting moment, but it was enough to embolden her spirit. The sheriff roared, pushing himself off the ground, and she felt adrenaline surge anew. With resolute strength, they charged forward as a united front against everything that sought to tear them apart. Fear dissolved like mist beneath the dawning sun, and bravery blazed down the narrow corridor. With one final push, they barreled through, breaking free from the chaos, hearts pounding in unison, refusing to surrender to the shadows. But as they burst into the night, gasping for breath, a chilling realization took hold: the dark figures were not finished yet. The leader shouted, his voice reverberating with rage as he rallied his men, but they were already engulfed in the rushing current of night. She shouted, urgency lacing her words as they sprinted toward freedom. The moon hung high above them, illuminated in a shroud of silver light, but they could still hear the shouts and footsteps pounding behind them. A voice boomed from the distance, but she wouldn't let fear dictate her destiny. With every thudding heartbeat, she ran, side by side with the sheriff, determination surging anew. He huffed, glancing back at the chaos boiling behind them. She yelled, adrenaline propelling them forward, but just as they reached the edge of town, a chilling shout rang out, freezing them in their tracks. The shadows loomed larger than life, darkness clinging to their every step. The men shouted, advancing upon them, a gaping maw of trouble threatening to close in. And suddenly, as the darkness pressed in, they knew they were at the precipice of something colossal. In that moment, the tide of fate hung in the balance, poised to reveal just how far they were willing to go to reclaim their lives, their town, their very souls. With every ounce of courage she possessed, she stood her ground, heart racing, ready to confront whatever awaited them in the night. They had fought through shadows, and there would be no turning back now.